Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, "To an unknown God." What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So if you get nothing else from this sermon, please get this. The time to set aside our idols is now. We have been working through Acts, so now we jump a little further in the story. Paul has had his conversion moment. He is preaching and he is teaching. And now he finds himself in Athens, center of philosophy and learning. Our story picks up with Paul going to the Areopagus, or as you probably know it better, Mars Hill. Paul has been in Athens for a bit now. He's been to its synagogue, preached on its street corners. Athens is a place of philosophers, a place of learning and ideas. Athenians love to hear about new ideas. An Athenian never met a new idea they didn't at least want to hear about. And Paul, with his message about Jesus Christ and his death and resurrection, very much has a new idea. So to all the interested people, interested in new ideas, Paul decides to give a sermon, because what else is a preacher to do? He walks up the Areopagus, walks up Mars Hill. As he's working, we have to set the scene a bit. You see, Mars Hill is the center of Athenian life. Over on the left is the temple to Athena, the patron goddess of the city. Over on the right is the temple to Eumenides, which are those beings that are responsible for attacking your conscience when you do wrong. On the other side, there's the temple to Theseus, the national hero. As Paul reaches the top of the hill, he begins. "I see you are very religious," says Paul. Can't miss that fact. You have a temple to everything. And just to cover your bases, you have a temple to an unknown God, just in case you missed someone. But let's be honest, says Paul. All those temples haven't really worked, have they? God is not worshipped in temples made of stone, says Paul. The Eumenides, or as they're called, the Furies, don't really ease your conscience, they just attack it. That temple over there hasn't eased your conscience one bit. And Theseus, well, as much as he's a national hero, he didn't help much when the Romans came a-conquering, did he? And Athena herself, national god, well, you're still ruled by Rome, and Athena hasn't returned Athens to the greatness of her glory days. None of those temples have really worked, have they? But, Paul says, you might be onto something with that whole unknown God thing. Let me tell you about this unknown God. This God can't be controlled or bought or paid off like all your idols. You can't control this God. You can't touch him. Can't put your hands on him, says Paul. This God is not far away like all the idols and other gods you worship. In him we live and move and have our being. Indeed, he is not far from each one of us. So close that even this is the God who is with us in death, and so close to us that this God raises to new life in Jesus Christ. So Paul ends his sermon by saying it's time to put away all your idols. They haven't worked anyway. The time is right now. If you need any more proof in that, just look at the one who is raised from the dead. God will actually grant you new life. Time to put the idols away. So the question for us today is this: are we ready to put away our idols? You may be thinking to yourselves, Pastor, I don't have any idols. Here's the thing. Though we really aren't very different from the Athenians. If Paul were here today, I doubt his line would be any different to us. He would walk right up to the National Mall and say, "You Americans, I see you are very religious." We may not exactly build temples like the Athenians, but we do have our gods, and we have lots of them. Our false idols and gods of money or violence or power or freedom or technology or success or achievement or views or followers. Our false temples built to politics of hate and anger and resentment. We are very religious. And here's the other thing. Each of us, we can be honest about this, each of us has made a sacrifice or two at one of those temples, hoping that maybe a little more resentment and hate would bring back the good old days, or that maybe a little bit more money would mean more life, or that maybe a little more violence would make us safe, or that doing more of what I want and disregarding my neighbor's needs would mean true freedom. We have hoped that the false gods of power on our side would mean greatness. And we have hoped that the idol of success and achievement would mean an end to anxiety. And you know what? It hasn't worked. Just like the Athenians, Paul is looking at us and saying, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We have all tried our idols, but our idols can't grant new life or hope or love. Paul is telling us that only Jesus Christ can do those things. Only this one raised from the dead and who is very near to us can give us new life and love and hope. There is a better way, says Paul, a better script to follow. That means admitting that all of our doing, all of our attempts at building idols and temples have failed. Time to give them up, says Paul, and admit the truth. And the beautiful part, says Paul, is that the unknown God, the God who actually raises from the dead, the God who actually gives us new hope, that God is not far off from each one of us. Not far from us, even when all the idols fail. So, are you ready to give up your idols? Amen.
Amen.
All right, our first question for discussion. So you have to hand it to the Athenians. They have all their bases covered. Paul is standing on a hill that has many different temples dedicated to many different gods and national heroes. They even have an altar dedicated to the unknown God. I just love that. It's like, just in case we missed somebody, let's put the unknown God, you know. So where are you, where are we? And that we can mean you personally, or we as church, or we as society. Where are we trying to have all our bases covered, and thereby missing the God in whom we live and move and have our being?
Well, for me, I think that when you have tragedy and you have a crisis, then it is a huge reminder of how trying to cover our bases doesn't work.
Yeah.
And
No,
also brings to fore the needs of others, that we've kind of talked about theme-wise. And when I was thinking about this, I didn't realize until just now that everything I looked at was a financial thing, but I'll kind of sum it up in societal focus, in that we have a tendency to look to building our riches instead of making sure that everyone in our society is cared for.
Right.
So.
No, I agree with that. And the element of trying to cover all our bases is we say, well, I can donate with that money.
Yeah.
I can do something, and it's like, well,
That's not really.
the money only goes actually so far.
Yeah.
So I'll compliment what you had, because I started in the financial end, but I went the other way. I went to the social end. So I went and did, so my wife would say this better, I'm spiritual but not religious, okay? So self is what becomes who we are. So when I read this, I saw, the unknown, and what people were doing is putting God in a box, where this is where each one of our gods is, and this is where the unknown have no idea where the unknown God is, right?
Right. But we'll put him in a box.
We'll put him in a box.
We have no idea who he is, but he's boxed up right over there. Yeah. It's great, isn't it, though? It's awesome.
27% of our culture
Yeah.
is spiritual and not religious. And that's huge. If you really think about it, 1 out of 4 people think that their self and God in a box is important. So I think Mrs. Nelson and I did this together, so I'm not the only author of this. It means we as Christians have not shown enough of who God is and what God can do in the love that he's given for us. Religion implies buildings, the money part, right?
Yeah.
And bureaucracy, not the love that what Christ has done for us. I have lots more to do, but I think we'll just stop there.
I mean, there is Dave was saying before we all got started, everybody, that, he was saying, why isn't Paul really, he's really nice here. And if you've been in the Galatians Bible study, you've been reading about how Paul's very much not nice in that letter, And so, Dave had this question about why isn't Paul just kind of smacking them the way he's smacking the Galatians, but part of the answer is, I think, to that, just where he hit it, that he's at these people who are very much kind of like us, they're very much, he wants to compliment the impulse, the impulse isn't bad, he says,
right.
You're reaching out and you're groping, and maybe you're even kind of maybe reaching onto a corner of the truth here. And so part of the answer is the crowd he's with is, Paul wants to say, I want to compliment the impulse, but it's a little more than that, and I think it's a similar pitch to to spirituality today. I think it's great news that so many people are, we're not facing a wave of atheism,
right.
And I think that's great news, and so the pitch is similar. It's not an angry pitch. It's a pitch of, you're close, you're so close. Let me help you a little bit here, Yeah. Dan.
Kate actually cut right to the elephant in the stadium and said professional sports.
Yeah.
As a culture.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, in this town, college sports.
Right.
Yeah.
I will fully confess my idolatry is baseball, And so I'm like, okay, how can the major league have baseball and be safe at the same time? That's my thing. Absolutely. I'll agree with that.
And that gets to one thing that I had thought about beforehand too, and that is, baseball makes me think of that, is mammon, money. We, right now, Major League Baseball is trying to work out how to come back. One of the sticking points that's keeping them from being able to do it is that revenues will be down.
Yeah, but they'll still have to pay their players.
The players' union is, at this point, as of this morning, was not willing to compromise and still wants all the pay. So
Yeah.
Obviously, money is still playing into being worship too, no
Yeah.
matter what the circumstances are.
Yeah.
And I think that goes way beyond professional baseball.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, right. You want to talk about idols. I mean, Martin Luther says if you ever read his large catechism, which is kind of like the adult version of the small catechism that everybody reads for confirmation, in the large catechism, when he's explaining what the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods," means, Martin Luther says you have to define what a god is,
Yeah.
and a god is anything that your heart clings to in times of need, and if that's the definition of a god, then yeah, boy, do we have all sorts of little gods running around out in the world, right? Yeah. All right, question number 2. So here we get Paul's elevator pitch, if you will, for faith to a people who are very unfamiliar with the Christian message. It's a pitch that finds similarity with a different culture and at the same time doesn't shame that culture. So what can we learn from this? And what would your pitch for faith be?
Well, I looked at it from the elevator thing, like the business thing. So I wrote faith, acceptance of grace in God from Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
right? Meet the gospel because it's for you. When we talked of catechism for the kids,
Yeah.
one of the things we made each of them say, who did Jesus die for? Now, most everybody says Jesus died for us, but each one of them said Jesus died for Ryan. It's a personal thing.
Yeah.
It's beyond you. It's wow. How could something that happened 2,000 years ago continue to be happening today? And that's what I see in this is that it's whatever culture you're in, it's for you. It really is for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's if you're in Galatians, you've heard this, in the Galatians Bible study, you've heard me say this, but for those of you that are not, right, like this is Martin Luther says these are the words you're supposed to cling to at communion, is the body of Christ given for you. As long as you get the for you part out, Luther says you've gotten the right words, because what you're supposed to hear is that Christ is, in the Latin, pro me, is for me,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I took it from the lesson part of it. I felt that Paul is demonstrating that we, instead of judging the people that he's trying to give the message to,
Right.
he actually kind of paves the way for them to hear it
Right.
by accepting that they've, like you said, that they're close, but they're not quite there. And instead of judging that, he's kind of just paving that way for them not to build a wall against his message.
Yeah.
And then I feel like for me, my elevator pitch would be that the foundations of Christian belief are love, grace, and forgiveness. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, right. The shame part is right. He doesn't say, again, he doesn't smack. He doesn't smack all the Athenians. He just kind of says, "Yeah, all right." I see you've got this one altar over here. Let's talk about this one altar a minute. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a place to build from.
Right.
That they have a religious foundation, so that they're not as far away from what he's going to talk about
Right.
as they might think that they are,
Right.
even though they have a little different approach. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
used to find this in my neighborhood that, people that I worked with in my block watch were afraid to approach our neighbors because they were afraid of criticism or whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of times just opening up a conversation about what their experience in the neighborhood was enough to diminish that
Yeah.
initial reaction to criticize.
Right.
Because I think you've given an invitation to the person to hear what you have to say by letting them speak first. And
Yeah, right. I mean, the Peter lesson actually said it, right? Always be prepared to give an account of the hope that is within you, and yeah, right. But that implies that somebody else has spoken first, and has asked you something. Yeah.
Yeah, this question reminded me of Catholic Bishop Robert Barron has a wonderful saying of you're not going to change the culture. So if you want to bring the word, you have to bring the word to the culture and not
Yeah.
expect
Yeah.
it to come to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what Paul's done here. He is respecting the culture of the Athenians. And then, as a population, he's finding the common ground. It's like, okay, yeah, we are both deeply religious.
Yeah.
Now let's build from that.
Right.
And that in turn on the individual level, getting to the elevator speech, I don't have a quick elevator speech, but it's because I think Thomas Jefferson was right when he said, I am a religion of one. We all experience faith,
Yeah.
God, in our own unique ways, with our own unique lenses, because of our own unique life experiences. So what Martin Luther says is going to mean something different to you than it means to me
Yep.
in its precise livability.
Yeah.
And I think that's the good thing about what Paul is telling us here. Find the common ground. What is special between you and who you're talking to? And then
Right.
what resonates in the message?
Right.
And that's what you build from.
Right.
Although Kate says it much more succinctly, as usual.
She usually does.
She said the message is God loves you. Full stop.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. My mom always used to ask me. My mom's a pastor, and growing up, she would, when she was stuck on a sermon, she goes, "What should I preach on?" And as a kid, I was just interested in getting out, like, of church as soon as possible, you know. And so I was like, "Well, isn't it just God loves you, go home, like, and then we can all go home?" Yeah, I mean, right. And the hard part for us, especially today as Lutherans, and every Christian, I think, is that we are so used to actually the culture sending us people, you know, like we didn't actually have to do this work of coming to the culture because we were in control. And so, you know, like we didn't have to engage. I had this shut-in at my previous church, and she was a beautiful woman, you know, just lovely. It was great. And I was telling her, I was sitting with her, and she was Transylvanian Saxon, so she still had the accent and everything, you know, and I was sitting with her telling about all the stuff going on at church and all the ministries going on, and she finally just paused, and she looked at me and went, "It used to be so easy." I was like, "What do you mean, Maria?" And she goes, "Church, it used to be so easy," is what she said, you know. And I was like, "Well, say more about that. What do you mean?" And she goes, "Well," and she went, "In the old country," she said, "you know, when you came over to Martin Luther, you did, you know, when you came to Youngstown, you did two things. You found the Saxon Club, and then you found the church," you know, and that was it. And in that world, she's right. It's very easy, and there's very little cultural engagement that has to be done.
Yeah.
In the, you know, you don't have to go to the Athenians and say, you know, "Let me interact with the unknown God altar." You know, you can just wait for the Athenians to come to you. And we're so used to that what's hard is we're not used to going out and saying, "Hey, here's this cultural touchstone." Yeah.
And really, that's what evangelization is all about.
Right.
It is. That's what the apostles did. It's the
Right.
going out.
Right.
But on the other hand, on the coming in part, Dan Swain says, where else can you go for free counseling 24/7?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, right, you know, or at least somebody to listen to, you know, I mean, yeah, right. So I like to tell people, like, I can't, you know, I can listen to you as much as you want, you know, I can't be your therapist. I can recommend you a therapist, but I can't be that, but I can listen. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. All right, final question. If the hard news is that we try and unsuccessfully cover all our bases, then the good news is that we have been given assurance by Christ's resurrection, and that the same God who offers us assurance is not far from each one of us. So does that assurance feel close now, and where do you feel that assurance in life at the moment?
I often, when I feel anxious about whatever in life, it feels more distant. And I know that it's because of me, but it does feel more distant. But I find that the thing that kind of regrounds me in that is the Lord's Prayer. And for me, that just kind of covers all the bases and brings me back to the core and important things that I should focus on,
Right.
even in my anxiety. So
Yeah.
I
No.
say it a lot.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, there's something to that, that ritual regrounds you, and that, I mean, because this is true about even me. There are some Sundays where I am just not feeling it, and but I find that it's those Sundays that I have to do, all the movements and all, and like, if I finally start start doing the ritual, something about that kind of recenters myself in it, absolutely.
Which is tough now because many of us are working from home
Right.
Yeah.
or not working at all. And so this ritual's gone.
Yeah. Or very different, at least.
Or
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah.
Some people are working nonstop. Some others are, trying to figure out what to do. Right.
Right. Some people don't have enough work. Some people have too much.
Or playing video games, or
Right.
a whole bunch of different stuff. But for me, the sitting in silence and stopping is really important, and reflecting what I'm doing now, how it will be better, because you have to think about things are going to be better.
Right.
Gloria Davis is going to be able to hug somebody in a few weeks,
Right.
just not on the
Eventually.
31st,
Right. Yeah. Right.
if that happens.
Yeah.
It's a time to really think about how different it is, and that if you think about what God has done for you and your blessings, I think it's better.
Yeah.
I think it's better because it's so different. You don't get that. I'm putting on my vests. I have the cross. I have all this stuff on me, or how I look for. That's gone. We
Yeah.
need that
Right.
ability to look at ourselves and invite God in our life to help us.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think stillness is stillness or silence is a huge part of that. I have a friend who's a musician who says that it's the silence in music that actually makes it music, not the notes. He goes, because if it's just constant notes, then it's noise, and that's all it is, and it becomes music when there's rests, stops, and pauses in it, it's like, oh, that's an interesting,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the rest are intentional.
Right.
They're not by accident.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It's not randomly stopping,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, now you're getting kind of zen.
I know.
There's no darkness without light.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Kathleen Nelson, the Alexis, Mrs. Nelson, once again, cutting to the quick, that we can still be a church together
Yeah.
and learn new, meaningful ways to do it during this time apart. It's kind of like what you were relating to with work, Dave. But as a spiritual community, this is really, we still pulled it off.
Right.
We're still a community online. I think that is great. And I was feeling the same way, though, in a more direct, personal way, where I feel the assurance. It's from each person in this room. It's from everyone who's watching the service online right now. It's from the virtual hug that Dan Swain still manages to give me every week over the interweb.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds kind of maudlin, but I get Christ's assurance from the people
Yeah.
in this church.
Right.
They remain
Yep.
so welcoming, so non-judgmental, and accepting.
Yeah.
I always have a sense of assurance that if nowhere else on the planet, I am welcome here.
Yep.
So, in a very real sense, this is where Christ's assurance lives.
Yeah.
RELC.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Scripture we believe Jesus comes to us in the sacraments, and that's really important. Don't get me wrong, and very necessary, and I miss it terribly, But one of the things to remember is exactly that the other place Scripture says Jesus comes to us is in the mutual consolation of brothers and sisters, is what the Bible calls it. And that, just as real as that physical presence in communion is, and it's really important, one of the central things of our worship life, that mutual consolation is just as important, and that has not gone away in this moment.
no.
When I was a sophomore in high school, our house caught on fire, and My mother was actually at a church council meeting that night, and it was a little difficult to get a hold of her because there were no cell phones at that point. But we had an intern at the church, and he followed my mother home. And up until they got there, the anxiety level for my siblings and my dad and I was through the roof.
Yeah.
But having the presence of someone else from our church kind of brought that all down to a level that allowed us to really get through. I mean, it was a 2-hour process putting that fire out in our house, and he provided a safeness for us that it was just a reminder that there is somebody walking with us, and that God had sent him to do that through that tragedy.
Yep.
And it was really, obviously I still remember it today, and that was many years ago. So,
Well, Tricia Oler kind of has something related to that. You know, we're constantly told in practicing mindfulness and meditation and all that, and mental health, gratitude.
Yeah.
Always spend some time every day finding something you are thankful for. And Tricia Oler said for her, she finds assurance in counting her blessings. You know, quite
Yeah.
simply, no matter what else is going on.
Right.
And Donna Swain sure misses hugs. They are what center her. So
Yeah.
again, the personal people thing.
Yeah, that personal people thing. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the gratitude piece, again, Galatians people, you're going to be sick of me saying this, but, we talked about how that's the one letter Paul doesn't begin with a thanksgiving, and that says something about how angry Paul is in that letter, but the rest of them, he's saying thanksgiving even in places like Corinth, and Corinth is a mess. That church there in Corinth, I mean, we'll go over 1st and 2nd Corinthians sometime. That church is a mess, and Paul will talk about in 2 Corinthians about how he's crying, at what's gone on between him and the church is so hurtful, but he still manages to give thanks, in that letter. And there is something about, we begin this, and the kids always ask me, they always ask, how do we pray? And it's like, well, you begin with thanks, and then you say what you need, and those are the two, you say, thank you for what you have given me, here's what I need, and we need both those things to kind of keep it in balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. You reminded me of the scene in Oliver where Oliver goes back for more gruel.
Yeah.
Please, sir, may I have more?
Right. And we're kind of expecting God to say no, but, God's like, sure.
Yeah. Here, have some.
Right. It's free. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Great discussion. Keep it up. You can keep talking about it. We're going to go on. We have another hymn. So we'll have our second hymn at this point. Lord, listen to your children praying, which seems to fit, I think.